Malik Reed stood at the inspection table with a clipboard in one hand and a red sign in the other. The room around him was full of noise. The belt hummed, bins clattered as workers shifted them across the floor. Voices traded weights and lot numbers over the machinery. None of that noise was his job to manage. He was not watching the whole room. He was watching one bin. For the last 20 minutes, that bin had been the only thing that mattered to him, more than the trucks outside, more than the clock on the wall behind Evelyn's office. The top layers looked the way they were supposed to look. Firm skin, even color, nothing that would make a buyer hesitate. But the fruit coming up from the bottom of that bin told a different story. Deep bruising, broken skin, tissue damage that did not match anything above it. Malik pulled 3 samples in a row, and all 3 told him the same thing. The damage was past the threshold Rosa had set that morning. He did not touch the conveyor. He was never allowed to touch the conveyor. Instead, he lifted the red sign that said hold and pressed the yellow quality alert button on the post beside him. An adult operator brought the line to a stop. 3 trucks were waiting outside the dock. Somewhere across the building, a processing window was going to close in under 2 hours. Evelyn Carter walked over, looked at the clock, and said the cold room still had 5 hours left. Malik looked at the bin in front of him and answered her. The cold room had 5 hours. The food buyers did not. To understand why that mattered, it helps to go back 72 hours to the morning this load was rejected in the first place. 72 hours earlier, a retail buyer looked at 60,000 pounds of apples under a premium contract and said no. The sizing was uneven. The color grade did not meet spec. Surface scuffing was worse than the contract allowed. And in a few of the bins, bruising ran higher than the agreement permitted. The buyer walked away, but the apples did not disappear. The packing house still owned every pound of that fruit because ownership does not transfer just because one buyer says no. Evelyn Carter, who managed the packing house floor, now had a decision in front of her. She could sort the load and look for other buyers. She could send the whole thing out for removal. Or she could do nothing and let the clock make the decision for her. She already had a written quote in hand, $6,000, to haul and dispose of the entire 60,000 pounds. That quote was clean, it was fast, and it made the whole problem go away on paper. But the cold room this load was sitting in needed to be cleared and sanitized within 72 hours, because another contracted shipment was scheduled to arrive right behind it. Trucks were still parked outside with their engines off, waiting on an answer nobody had given them yet. Workers stood near the cold room doors, unsure whether they were being sent home or handed a very different job. Renee had already been called twice that morning, once to ask about extra labor, once to ask whether Reed Produce Logistics could even take on a job this uncertain on such short notice, so the question hanging over the whole building was simple to ask and hard to answer. Were 60,000 pounds truly unusable, or had they only failed to meet one buyer's promise? Malik's first instinct was that the answer was obvious. If somebody out there was willing to buy imperfect apples, the problem would solve itself. Rosa Alvarez, the food safety and quality supervisor, did not argue with him. She set 2 apples on the table instead. One was small, a little pale, a little off in color, but firm when she pressed it. The other looked almost perfect, round, bright red, no visible marks, except a small puncture near the stem. Malik pointed at the pretty one without hesitating. Rosa picked it up and cut it in half. Underneath the skin, the tissue was already breaking down, damage that had started at that puncture and spread where nobody could see it from the outside. She set the 2 halves down next to the small, plain apple that Malik had passed over. Imperfect is a description, she told him. Safe and suitable are decisions, and decisions have to be proven, not guessed at from across a table. That was the moment sorting by appearance stopped making sense to him. Malik had grown up believing something simpler than that, and it did not come from a textbook. He had once watched his mother drive a truckload of rejected produce straight to a removal site, and he had never forgotten how much good-looking fruit went into that pile. Since then, He had quietly believed that most of what got thrown away was wasted because a buyer somewhere cared too much about how food looked and not enough about anything else. Standing at that table, watching Rosa hold up two halves of a ruined apple, he realized the truth was more complicated than the story he had been carrying around. Appearance was one question. Safety was another. Whether a specific buyer could use the fruit was a third. And whether anyone could prove where that fruit had been and what had happened to it was a fourth question all on its own. Evelyn agreed to a limited recovery pilot, but only under conditions she wrote down herself. The packing house would keep ownership of the fruit the entire time. Renee Reed, Malik's mother, would sign a service agreement to coordinate labor and trucks, nothing more. Rosa would control every hold and every release. Any buyer who wanted apples had to hand over a written specification first. Every pound counted toward the final numbers would be net fruit weight with the bins, pallets, and packaging already subtracted. Every bin had to keep its lot identity from the moment it was sorted to the moment it left the building. Nothing rejected once could quietly slide back into the premium channel. Only a trained adult operator could start, stop, or adjust the conveyor. Before Malik was allowed anywhere near the inspection table, Rosa trained him herself. She walked him through the approved sampling pattern, the categories of damage he needed to recognize, and the exact threshold that required a quality alert. He could record what he saw and initiate a hold. He could not release fruit, change a grade, or certify a lot. Evelyn set a budget cap of $11,400 for the recovery effort, not counting whatever it cost to remove the fruit that still failed everyone. Evelyn read every condition out loud before she signed anything, and she made Malik repeat back the parts that applied to him. He was not a supervisor. He was not a certifier. He was not going to be the one standing between a truck and a buyer's signature. His entire authority began and ended with the ability to notice a problem and say so, loudly and immediately, to someone who could actually act on it. With those conditions in place, the sorting could begin. Renee and Malik spent the first hours on the phone, calling buyer after buyer who might take part of the load. Most of them said no before the conversation even got started. No cold storage space this week, no time to swap suppliers on short notice, no interest in mixed sizing, no processing window open. Some only bought full truckloads of uniform fruit, and this load was anything but uniform. Eventually 3 names came back with something close to a yes. Thomas Bell was willing to look at whole fruit seconds for his 2 discount grocery stores. Naomi Price had 1 narrow processing window open at her licensed applesauce facility. Walter Gaines needed a very specific blend for his licensed cidery, and he was clear that he was not interested in whatever nobody else wanted. 3 buyers, 3 completely different sets of standards, and none of them wanted the same apple. Thomas came to the receiving area himself and went through the fruit by hand. He checked firmness first, pressing his thumb gently into the skin. He checked for punctures and broken skin, for anything that looked like it would leak or rot inside a bag within a few days. He checked size, because his stores needed apples that fit into standard bag sizes without a lot of extra sorting on his end. He took the small apple with the uneven color without a second thought because it was firm, whole, and clean. He held up a different apple, one with a hairline crack near the stem that Malik had not even noticed, and set it aside. That crack would be a soft, leaking mess on a shelf in 3 days, he said, and no customer would ever know it started this small. By the time he finished walking the lot, Thomas had set his ceiling at 18,400 pounds. He needed several smaller size groups, not one large mixed batch, and he told Malik exactly that before he left. Naomi never came to inspect fruit by hand the way Thomas did. She worked the whole thing over the phone, in short, tense calls with Renee, while her own production schedule shifted underneath her. Her receiving window was fixed, and it closed at hour 69, not a minute later. She could take up to 21,600 pounds, but every pound had to meet her terms. Full lot codes on everything. Trimming loss inside limits her facility had already tested and approved. No decay, no mold, nothing close to it. No broken skin past what her equipment could safely process, nothing with a condition nobody could confirm, and the trucks had to physically arrive before her window closed, because a closed window did not reopen for anyone. Naomi was clear about one more thing, and Malik held on to it for the rest of the day. Her plant was not a place to send whatever Thomas turned down. It only took fruit that met its own specification on its own terms. Renee tried once, early on, to describe the load as apples that just did not fit the grocery aisle, hoping that framing might buy some flexibility. Naomi stopped her mid-sentence and asked for the actual defect data instead, bin by bin, not a summary. She did not want a story about what the fruit was not. She wanted numbers about what it was, and she wanted them before her window closed, not after. Walter met them at the cidery with a knife instead of a checklist. He cut 2 apples open on the spot. One was good-looking on the outside, but it belonged to the wrong variety for the blend he was running that week. He checked maturity, soluble solids, and acidity, the same way he checked every load that came through his gate. The good-looking apple failed his test and went back in the reject pile without ceremony. The second apple was small, a little uneven in color, but sound all the way through, and it matched the blend he needed. He kept that one. Walter set his ceiling at 12,000 pounds. "I'm not buying the ugliest apples," he told Malik. "I'm buying sound fruit for one specific cider run, and looks have nothing to do with it." His receiving window closed at hour 69 and 30 minutes after Naomi's. Malik had walked into the cidery, half expecting Walter to take almost anything, since bruised fruit and cider seemed like an obvious match in his head. Walter caught that assumption before Malik ever said it out loud. He told him plainly that a cidery was not a dumping ground for whatever a grocery store or a processing plant did not want. His acceptance decisions belonged to him alone. They depended on soundness, traceability, variety, maturity, sugar, and acidity, not on convenience. Walter would not accept fallen fruit, mold, decay, broken skin, or deep bruising. A processing step could not repair a bad receiving decision. Malik left that conversation with one more piece of the picture he had been missing all day. A cider run built around the wrong variety or the wrong sugar level did not become forgivable just because the fruit had come from a rejected load. Walter's standards did not bend for anyone's convenience, including the packing houses. Rosa marked out 4 zones on the floor with tape and hand-lettered signs, W, P, C, and R. For the first several hours, the sorting held steady and the numbers moved the way everyone expected, but the fruit itself was not standing still. The rejected load was not standing still. Every hour changed what could still be recovered. Bruises that were faint in the morning were darker by the afternoon. Firmness in some bins was already dropping. Buyer capacity shrank as each receiving window crept closer, because a window that was wide open at noon was almost shut by 4. One bin without a destination code sat untouched for 40 minutes, while Rosa and Renee argued over where it belonged. Some apples marked for Thomas in the morning no longer met his shelf life requirement by evening. Rosa held them back for a separate evaluation against Naomi's written specification. Only the fruit that independently passed Naomi's receiving limits moved into grade P. Fruit that failed both Naomi's specification and Walter's acceptance limits moved to grade R. No approved food destination remained for it under this recovery plan. Malik found the shift unsettling at first, the way a bin he had already mentally filed under one letter could quietly become something else an hour later. Rosa told him that was exactly why the zones existed, not as a one-time judgment made at the start of the day, but as a live decision that had to be checked again and again as conditions changed. Static materials could sit in a warehouse for a week without anyone worrying about it. Fresh fruit did not offer that kind of patience, and everyone on the floor had to work at the pace the fruit itself was setting, not the other way around. 3 separate problems threatened to slow the whole operation down. The first was packaging. Thomas rejected the oversized bins the crew had been using because the apples at the bottom were taking too much weight from the apples stacked on top. The crew switched to smaller bags and smaller boxes, which meant more handling and less speed. The second problem was scheduling. The truck headed to Naomi's plant fell behind, and Renee had to reorder the entire sorting sequence so the grade P fruit would leave the building first. The third problem was speed itself. The crew tried to make up lost time by running the conveyor faster, and the fruit started hitting the transfer points harder than before. Rosa brought the speed back down to the range she had approved that morning, somewhere between 2,000 and 2,200 pounds an hour. This was not the packing house's normal production rate. It was the approved rate for the 6-person manual recovery crew, who had to inspect, redirect, weigh, and repackage fruit without losing lot identity. At that pace, 60,000 pounds required nearly 29 productive line hours before sanitation, sampling, loading, buyer approvals, and truck delays were added on top. Malik understood, watching it happen, that running the line faster did not save the load. It just moved more of it into grade R. Each of those 3 problems cost time in a job where time was the one thing nobody could buy back. None of them were dramatic on their own: a wrong box size, a late truck, a few minutes of extra speed. But stacked together, they were exactly the kind of small pressure that made people want to cut corners on the last bin instead of the first one. Rosa reminded the crew more than once that hour 67 would judge them on the same standard as hour 1, and nobody argued with her about it. By the time the sun went down, the numbers on Rosa's clipboard were holding. Thomas had already received his first truck of grade W fruit. Naomi had accepted a processing lot with a complete paper trail behind it. Walter had signed off on his first cider lot after running his own tests. Every scale ticket had been checked, with tare weight subtracted before anything else was recorded. 4,800 pounds of grade R had already been logged, and every pound of it had a documented reason attached. 1,600 pounds had decay or mold. 1,200 pounds had broken skin or a serious puncture. 800 pounds had lost traceability or had drifted into an area it should never have reached. 1,200 pounds simply did not meet any of the 3 buyers' specifications. Nothing was missing from the tally, and nothing was unaccounted for. The system had already proven it worked, long before the last bin ever became a problem, which brings the story back to hour 67, and the bin Malik was watching when he raised the red sign. Roughly 10,000 pounds still had not left the building. About 6,800 of that was already sorted, sitting on pallets, waiting on loading, weighing, or a final release signature. Only one bin, 3,200 pounds, was still an open question. On paper, the cold room still had almost 5 hours left before its own deadline. But Naomi's window closed at hour 69. Walter's closed at hour 69 and 30 minutes. The compost hauler was scheduled to arrive at hour 71. Loading and weighing alone would eat close to an hour. Record reconciliation and final sanitation needed at least another 60 to 90 minutes on top of that. Once all of that was laid out, the real amount of time left to recover anything from that bin was well under 2 hours, not 5. Evelyn had looked at a single number on a wall clock and seen 5 hours of room. Malik had looked at 4 separate deadlines stacked on top of each other and seen something much smaller. That gap between the 2 of them was the entire reason he had raised the red sign, instead of waiting to see how the last bin sorted itself out. Nobody on the floor blamed him for stopping the line, not even Evelyn, once she walked through the same 4 deadlines herself. The disagreement was never about whether Malik had seen something real. It would have been reasonable to ask why they couldn't just slow down and sort that last bin more carefully. Some of the individual apples in it were probably still fine, but saving them the right way meant creating a brand new lot code, resorting at a much slower speed, pulling a fresh representative sample, waiting for Rosa to evaluate it, sending that data to a buyer, waiting for that buyer's approval, then loading, weighing, and finishing every piece of paperwork before a receiving window slammed shut. The approved sorting speed simply did not leave room for all of those steps in the time remaining. The problem was never that every apple in that bin was ruined. The problem was that the damage inside it was uneven, some fruit fine, some fruit showing deep bruising and broken skin, all mixed together in a way nobody could honestly describe as one condition. Neither Naomi nor Walter had approved fruit in that kind of uncertain state, and there was no time left to change that. Malik made his recommendation to Rosa that the entire 3,200 pounds move to grade R. Rosa reviewed the samples herself and approved the call. Evelyn pushed back because moving that much weight to grade R meant the recovery percentage would look worse on paper than anyone wanted. Malik answered her plainly. The goal was never to make the reject number disappear. The goal was to know exactly what they were sending and to whom. He gave up a piece of potential revenue. He gave up a cleaner-looking recovery percentage. He gave up the chance to claim they had saved almost the entire load. In exchange, he protected the buyer's written specifications, the food safety process Rosa had built, the identity of every lot on the floor, and the packing house's name on every scale ticket that would follow this one out the door. Naomi's truck cleared the dock first, reaching her facility and unloading before her receiving window closed at hour 69. Walter's truck followed close behind, arriving at the cidery before his window closed at hour 69 and 30 minutes. The final grocery shipment for Thomas pulled away from the loading area at hour 70 and 48 minutes. The compost hauler collected the grade R fruit shortly after hour 71. The sanitation crew had already been cleaning the cleared sections while the final trucks were being loaded. Once the compost bin left, only the last sorting zone and the final record check remained. The crew finished reconciling every record and completed sanitation at hour 71 and 22 minutes, 38 minutes before the deadline. When the final numbers were added up, they held exactly where the sorting had left them. 18,400 pounds went to Thomas as grade W, 21,600 pounds went to Naomi as grade P, 12,000 pounds went to Walter as grade C. 8,000 pounds went to grade R and left the food system entirely. Malik did not save every apple in that load. He helped move 52,000 pounds into 3 separate food streams, each one meeting its own buyer's written terms, and he made sure exactly 8,000 pounds were removed from food use for reasons anyone could check on paper. The financial picture told its own version of the same story. Evelyn's original quote to remove the entire 60,000 pounds had been $6,000, a flat cost with no recovery attached. The actual recovery effort cost $11,400 once every expense was added up. $3,800 went to additional labor, $1,400 went to sanitation and quality control. $1,750 went to packaging. $2,650 went to outbound trucking. $900 went to sampling, record keeping, and insurance. $900 went to coordination, rescheduling, and other documented expenses. Removing the 8,000 pounds of grade R fruit cost another $800 on top of that. Against those costs, the 3 buyers paid a combined $9,096, $4,416 from Thomas, $3,240 from Naomi, and $1,440 from Walter. The recovery operation still finished about $3,104 in the red, but removing the entire load outright would have cost $6,000, with nothing recovered at all. Compared with that documented alternative, recovery left the packing house about $2,896 better off. The packing house did not walk away with $2,896 in cash profit. Evelyn walked through those numbers with her accountant twice before she believed them, because on the surface, a recovery effort that still ended in a negative number did not sound like a win. But she had started the week facing a guaranteed loss of $6,000, and nothing else, no product moved, no relationships built with buyers, no proof that the packing house could handle a rejected load without simply throwing it away. What she ended the week with was a smaller loss, 3 buyers who had seen exactly how the packing house operated under pressure, and a documented process that could run again the next time a load came back rejected. None of that showed up as cash in the account, but all of it showed up somewhere. Evelyn approved a 90-day version of the program after that, with clear limits attached. It would only apply to quality rejected loads, never to anything involving contamination or a recall. Grade W and Grade P sorting would continue whenever buyer capacity allowed it. Grade C sorting would only run when Walter needed a specific blend that matched what was on hand. Grade R would be treated as a legitimate, documented outcome, not a failure to hide. The whole program would be reviewed for quality and cost every 30 days. Rosa added one line to the written procedure before she filed it away. Any trained observer may initiate a quality alert. Only an authorized person may stop, start, or adjust the conveyor, and that line did not change for anyone, including Malik. Renee asked Evelyn afterward whether the program would eventually let Malik take on more responsibility, since he had spent the whole 72 hours reading data as well as anyone twice his age on that floor. Evelyn told her that authority on a packing house floor was not something you handed out because someone had proven they were careful. It was something you handed out because someone had proven they were careful for long enough, under enough different conditions, that the paperwork could catch up to the trust. Malik was not offended by that answer, because by then he understood it better than he would have 72 hours earlier. By the time the cold room was empty, the 4 signs, W, P, C, and R, were still sitting on the floor where Rosa had placed them that morning. Malik picked up the old rejected sign that had been leaning against the wall since the retail buyer first walked away and turned it face down. Not because nothing had been rejected. 8,000 pounds had still been removed from food use, and nothing about that number had changed. But one single word had stopped being able to describe the whole load, and everyone on that floor knew it. The apples had been rejected as one load. They could only be recovered after someone stopped treating them as one kind of fruit. 18,400 pounds had gone to 2 grocery stores. 21,600 pounds had reached Naomi's applesauce facility before its receiving window closed. 12,000 pounds had gone to a cidery that wanted sound fruit matching its own standards, not fruit nobody else wanted. Rosa switched off the lights over the sorting zones one at a time. W, then P, then C, then R, until the cold room was dark except for the hallway light spilling in from outside. Malik did not save every apple. He made sure every pound went only where the evidence allowed it to go.